The segmented, chitin-plated school transport whined to a halt, its repulsor lift sighing as they settled onto the crystalline plaza. The air inside the cabin was thick with the recycled atmosphere tang of juvenile secretions and the high-frequency static of 30 distinct, grating voices. "Are we there? Are we there? My lowest locomotion pads are numb," gurgled a small purple being named Gleep. "Your lowest locomotion pads are stupid, Gleep," buzzed Zorb, flicking a slimy pellet across the aisle with a casual snap of his primary tentacle. Miss Knid's multiple sensory stalks drooped in exhaustion. The field trip to ZeZoo was the highlight of the semester, and it hadn't even been 10 minutes since they'd left the learning creche. Her central respiration sac pulsed in a long, weary sigh that was lost in the din. "Yes, Gleep, we are here," she vibrated, her voice already strained. The transport's membrane doors dilated with a wet schloop. A wave of small, multi-tentacled bodies immediately squelched and bounced onto the plaza, heedless of the thick, lavender atmosphere or the two sickly yellow suns hanging in the sky. "I cleaned the Primitive Wars exhibit," shrieked Flip, extending all 8 of her grasping tendrils as she slithered toward the entrance. "Nuh-uh, I'm going to the failed gaseous civilizations," retorted Blob, intentionally sliding his own bulk in front of her, causing a multi-tentacle pile-up. "Blob smeared his mucus on me, Knid. He did it on purpose. Did not, you spore sack." Miss Knid oozed heavily out of the transport, her own stabilization tentacles trembling. Before them loomed ZeZoo, the largest museum of cultures in the universe. It wasn't a building so much as a contained temporal anomaly, a swirling vortex of impossible architecture that folded in on itself, showcasing shimmering pocket realities behind vast, transparent walls. The class, naturally, was already trying to lick the entrance ramp. "Spawn group, form a cohesive cluster," Miss Knid bellowed, clapping her toughest upper tentacles together for emphasis. The sharp smack momentarily silenced the gurgling. "Listen to my vibrations. We are guests here," she trilled, pointing a stern blue-tipped tentacle at the chaotic mass. "This museum contains priceless artifacts from quadrants you haven't even evolved the organs to perceive. I expect you to modulate your vocal sacs." She scanned the group, her central stalk fixing on Zorb, who was already trying to poke a sleeping guard drone. "There will be no unauthorized slithering. You will stay with your assigned digestion partner. Do not extend your grasping tendrils to touch the displays. Do not secrete any adhesive or acidic fluids on the barriers. And if I find a single one of you attempting to taste test the holographic simulations, you will be on atmospheric filtration duty for the next moon cycle." With a final desperate vibration, Miss Knid shunted the chattering mass through the preliminary bioscanner. "Stay clustered! Stay clustered!" They used into the first exhibit, the Gallery of Subliminal Harmonics. The vast, quiet chamber was filled with towering iridescent crystals that hung suspended in a low-gravity field. They pulsed with faint shifting colours, mostly beige, pale mauve, and a particularly dull shade of grey. A low resonant froom filled the air, which, according to the plaque, was the unified sorrow song of the lost Kukula race. The class stopped. The silence lasted 0.4 seconds. "This is stupid," Zorb buzzed, his auditory filaments drooping. "It's not doing anything," Flip complained, prodding the kinetic barrier around the nearest crystal. "It's just slow noise." "My visual receptors are bored," Gleep whined, plopping onto the floor in a gelatinous puddle. "This is less interesting than the ceiling of the nutrition vat." "It's not supposed to do anything, spawn cluster," Miss Knid hissed, her stabilization tentacles quivering in frustration. The thrum of the sorrow song was giving her a cranial sac rupture. "This is art. It's about feeling." "I feel like my lowest tentacle is asleep," Blob muttered. Miss Kinnear clapped her upper limbs again. Query slates out. Now, open to the cultural significance chapter. You all have questions that must be answered before we move on. A collective groan vibrated through the group. Reluctantly, the children pulled out their small, damp data pads. Question 1, Flib read aloud in a monotone squeak. Analyze how the artist's use of negative space frequencies evokes the socio-economic despair of the Kukulah's 4th dynasty. Flib looked up. I don't know what any of those vibrations mean. Just write sad rocks, Zorp whispered, already scribbling a crude drawing of a stick being getting vaporized onto his own slate. Zorp, are you filling in the answers? Mrs. Kinnear demanded, looming over him. Yes, Miss Kinnear, Zorp said innocently, hiding the drawing with his shortest tentacle. I'm just writing how it makes me feel existential. Mrs. Kinnear, Gleep shrieked, waving his slate in the air. When are we going to the primitive war section? Blob's oldest sibling pod said they have a working replica of a Mark IV plasma obliterator. The entire class instantly perked up, their various sensory organs swiveling toward the teacher. Oh, and the greatest disintegrations exhibit, buzzed Flib, her boredom vanishing. I want to see the annihilation of the Florg. You will see nothing, Mrs. Kinnear snapped, her central mass flushing a deep, angry crimson, until you have sufficiently analysed the socio-economic despair. Now write. What colour best represents the Kukulah's lack of internal validation? Grumbling, the Spawn group returned to their slates. Beige, Gleep wrote, then immediately started trying to see what Blorp was writing. Stop copying my existential dread, Blorp hissed, shielding his slate. I'm not. I'm just checking if you spelled socio-economic right, you spore sack. After what felt like an entire digestive cycle, Miss Kinnear finally relented, her internal structure sagging in defeat. Fine, we can proceed to the historical exhibits, but you will complete the art analysis during your next regeneration period. This vague threat was ignored. A unified, slimy yes echoed through the beige gallery, and the spawn cluster initially coalesced into a single high-speed blob, squelching toward the exit. Stay clustered! No slivering races! Miss Kinnear bellowed, already left behind. The transition was jarring. They left the serene, thrumming silence of the art wing and entered a pressurized tunnel that dilated into the dome of galactic repulsion. The change was instantaneous. The air snapped with the smell of ozone and simulated plasma fire. The sound was a deafening cacophony of recorded battle cries, orchestral martial music, and the thwoom of distant holographic explosions. Whoa! Gleep gurgled, all his sensory stalks vibrating at maximum frequency. It smells like victory! The kids fanned out, their query slates forgotten, bouncing off the padded floor in their excitement. The dome was a swirling 360-degree holographic theatre. In the centre, a towering 20-tentacle-tall statue of Grand Admiral Vorkresh stood frozen in a pose of heroic fury. He was depicted crushing the carapace of a gnat swarm scout drone beneath his massive lower pads. I claim the Vorleech Crusades display, Zorp shrieked, sliding on a trail of his own mucus toward a pulsating red exhibit. Nuh-uh, I'm seeing the Siege of the Xylos Nebula, Flib retorted, already mashing her tendrils onto an interactive tactical display, causing tiny red warning lights to flash. Look, I just repelled the first wave. Take that, you crystalline spore sacks! Miss Kinnear oozed into the dome, just in time to see Blop attempting to climb the base of Admiral Vorkresh's statue. Blop! Your primary tentacles are not for scaling historical monuments, she trilled, her voice barely audible over the sound of a simulated antimatter charge detonating. The walls shimmered with projections of legendary battles. They watched, mesmerized, as fleets of organic steel cruisers vaporized entire armadas of silicon-based invaders. They saw the 1,000-cycle stand at the Kolop Rift, where a single battalion held off the Devourers, using nothing but amplified sonic lances. Miss Kinnear, look! Gleep shouted, pointing his shortest tentacle at a display. "It's a working model of a Z-class particle disruptor. Can we touch it? Can we fire it?"
"Absolutely not. That is a priceless artifact of..."
Ms. Kinnear squinted at the plaque.
"The third quadrant purification. Oh dear."
"My digestion partner's older sibling pod said this is the best part," Zorp buzzed, his oculars wide. He was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling display showcasing the great generals. Hollow projections of stern, multi-limbed beings faded in and out. Matriarch Selene, who repelled the Mind-Eaters by broadcasting lethal frequencies of pure logic. General Grum, the tiny, unassuming being who famously weaponized tectonic plates.
"Query slates, spawn cluster,"
Ms. Kinnear attempted weakly, knowing it was futile.
"You have questions on the strategic importance of Admiral Volcresh's..."
She was cut off by a deafening vroom as Flib and Zorp activated a battle simulator ride at the same time.
"This isn't a theme park!"
Ms. Kinnear vibrated, but her spawn group was already gone, lost in the glorious, noisy, educational violence of their history. The adrenal scent of simulated warfare began to fade as the class reached the end of the dome. The thunderous thums and plasma screeches were replaced by the low ambient hum of the museum's final massive display. It was the great map of galactic consolidation. A vast, dark wall shimmered with holographic light, charting the known universe. Swirls of vibrant color, blues, greens, purples, designated the territories of the Allied empires. Duller, flickering zones showed areas of pacification or former threats. But in the lowest right quadrant, far out on an unremarkable spiral arm, pulsed a vast, angry, blood-red blotch. It was labeled simply, Containment Zone 7 Gamma. Zorp, still vibrating from the battle simulator, was the first to notice it. "Hey, that's a huge conquered place." "It's not conquered, you fluid sack," Flip snapped, reading the fine print on the plaque. "It says, unreachable, prohibited. It's not part of the consolidation." Glee, who had been trying to see if his mucus would stick to the map's barrier, squinted his ocular stalks. "Look how big that is. Is that the Ooman Empire everyone's digestion pod whispers about?" "It's human, you dork," Blorp hissed, his voice surprisingly sharp. An immediate, heavy silence fell over the spawn cluster. The rowdy, chaotic energy from the war dome evaporated, sucked into a vacuum. All 30 children stopped squelching. They stopped vibrating. They just stared at the red blotch. Ms. Kinnear oozed up behind them. Her usual exhaustion was replaced by a deep, somatic chill. She lowered her voice, the vibration barely audible. "Yes, Glebe, that is them." The class instinctively clustered closer together, their small tentacles linking up for comfort. Even Zorp looked subdued. "We all know the protocols," Ms. Kinnear continued, her own sensory stalks fixed on the pulsating red zone. "We all know why we never talk about those abominations. Why the beacons are always lit on the outer rim. Why we don't listen to their ancient, chaotic frequency broadcasts." 30 small, multi-faceted heads nodded. There was no joking, no side chatter, just the quiet, shared understanding of a universal truth. The silence in the dome was now heavier than the sorrow song of the Kukala. "Good," Ms. Kinnear finally vibrated, pulling her own gaze away from the map. She shunted her central mass toward the final archway, trying to force resilience back into her tone. "Now, put this out of your filtration sacs. It is time for the final section, the biosamples." With one last nervous glance at the red-stained map, the spawn cluster followed her. They passed through a vapor decontamination field and emerged into a completely different world. The noise and dark metal of the war dome gave way to a massive, sun-filled biosphere. They were on a high railed walkway overlooking the living galaxy. Below them, Stretching out for kilometers were hundreds of shimmering domes, open-air craters, and deep aquatic tanks, each a perfect self-contained replica of a world. And within them, creatures of every conceivable shape, size, and molecular base crawled, flew, burrowed, and sublimated. "Whoa," Gleep whispered, his fear instantly forgotten. "It's the real ZeZoo." The fear of the red-stained map vanished as if it had been purged by a sanitation drone. The moment they entered the biosphere, the heavy, somber mood was shattered by 30 simultaneous squeals, gurgles, and buzzes. The air here was real, a thick, warm, humid soup of methane, damp soil, fungal spores, and high-frequency pheromones. "It smells like Blob's dormant pouch," Gleep shrieked, already bouncing on his lowest pads. "That's not, you mucus clod." "Spawn cluster, do not extend tentacles over the primary barrier." Ms. Kinid vibrated, but she was already too late. They swarmed the first habitat, the low-gravity floof spinners of Mylar. The enclosure was filled with small, fuzzy, six-stalked beings that bounced gently through the purple misted air, spinning webs of shimmering, iridescent crystal. "Ah!" Flip cooed, pressing her entire upper mass against the kinetic containment field. "They're adorable! I want one for my spawning day. Miss Kinnick, can I have one? I'll filter its waste pouch myself." "They are not pets, Flib. They are a Class 8 psionic hive mind that communicates exclusively through equations of sorrow," Ms. Kinnick droned, reading the plaque. "I bet I could vaporize one with a tiny disruptor," Zorp whispered, making pew-pew noises with his respiration sacs. They squelched on past the geloid sentience of Pateau. "It's just a puddle of pink slime." And the amorphous gloop sacs. "Gross, it's just digesting." Then they reached the alpha predator of Kresh 9. The creature was a massive, silicon-based, crystalline entity that stood perfectly still, resembling a jagged inert statue. "This is boring," Blob grumbled, and he slapped his thickest lower tentacle right on the "Do Not Vibrate" warning symbol on the barrier. In a microsecond, the statue moved. A crystalline maw 3 meters wide opened, and the creature slammed the barrier with a force that sent a sonic shatter through the walkway. The entire class shrieked, secreted terror fluids, and fell over each other in a writhing, multi-limbed pile. Miss Kinnaird, who had flattened herself against the far wall, pulsed with adrenaline. "Blob, you could have caused a molecular resonance cascade!" Gleep, from the bottom of the pile, squeaked, "Awesome! Do it again, Blob!" "Query slates!" Miss Kinnaird tried, her voice weak. "We must compare the respiratory functions of the floof spinner with the... what's the use?" It was near the gaseous habitats that the real chaos began. "Look!" Zorp yelled, pointing to the habitat of the volatile puff spores of Ando. "It's the failed gaseous civilizations we wanted to see." "The plaque says do not agitate," Flip read, her voice dripping with sudden, malicious intent. "It says their primary defense mechanism is spontaneous, non-lethal detonation." Before Ms. Kinnaird could even formulate a "no," Blob had grabbed his already cracked query slate and flung it with all his might at the habitat's temperature control unit. "Blob, no!" The habitat's internal atmosphere shifted, and a single pod-sized neon-purple spore floated up from the misty depths. It drifted lazily over the railing. The children stared, their sentry stalks raised in unison. The spore hovered directly over Gleep. It paused, and then, with a soft, wet whoomph, it exploded. Gleep was instantly covered, head to locomotion pads, in a thick, simmering, bright purple, foul-smelling dust. There was a moment of profound, horrified silence. Gleep looked down at his own purple-dusted tentacles. He vibrated. "I'm dusted! I'm dusted! I'm a purple battle general!" The dam broke. "I want to be dusted! Dust me! Dust me! Fling your slates! Fling your slates!" The entire spawn cluster began grabbing their slates, Their nutrient packs, anything they could throw, trying to agitate the puff spores, all while chanting, "Dust, dust, dust, dust!" It took 2 fully deputized maintenance drones and a direct threat of permanent residence in the juvenile decontamination vats to get the class to quiet down. Gleep, now an itchy, miserable shade of purple, was secreting a steady stream of remorse fluid. The "dust, dust, dust" chant had died, replaced by the whir of the drones filtering the air.
"From this point,"
Ms. Knid vibrated, her voice a low, dangerous thrum that rattled their inner membranes.
"If I hear a single unauthorized vocalization, you will all be writing a 5,000 vibration analysis on the mating habits of the fruit spinners. Understood?"
They clustered and nodded, a massive subdued purple-dusted spawn. They slithered past the final cheerful biosphere. The architecture changed instantly. The warm, humid air of the zoo was sucked away, replaced by a cold, sterile metallic tang. The walls became thick, sound-dampening plates of black alloy. Instead of info plaques, there were warning signs. "Absolute vibrational silence required. No sudden photon emissions. No flash spores. Do not agitate the specimen. Your biological integrity is your own responsibility." 2 massive 8-limbed Void Guard sentinels stood at the final doorway, their black carapaces absorbing all light. They held active, humming resonance glaives. They did not acknowledge the class, their multiple oculars fixed on the corridor ahead. The children, even Zorp, pressed close to Ms. Knid. Their various limbs instinctively linked together. This was it. The red map.
"Not a sound,"
Ms. Knid whispered, her central stalk quivering. A heavy door dilated, and they were ushered into a completely dark observation chamber. It was cold. A single, massive one-way mirror dominated the wall, glowing faintly from the light inside the exhibit. The class arranged itself in a trembling line. Inside, the habitat was stark, sterile and beige, not unlike the art gallery. In the center sat the creature. It was disgusting. It was pathetically soft. A biped with only 2 upper manipulation limbs and 2 lower stabilization limbs. It had no visible tentacles, no grasping pads, no protective carapace. It was covered in a thin, fleshy, pinkish beige membrane, topped with a cluster of fine, dark filaments on its head globule. Its sensory organs, just 2 visual receptors, a single respiration port, and 1 vocalization intake port, were all clustered inefficiently on its front. It was hunched over a small square table, wearing artificial fiber coverings that looked uncomfortably restrictive. Its 2 upper limbs, ending in 10 tiny, hyper-articulated distal tendrils, were a blur. They were striking a bizarre, flat contraption, producing a rapid, irritating, high-frequency click, 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 clack. Suddenly, the creature made a loud groaning noise from its vocalization port, grabbed the filaments on its head globule with both upper limbs, and then slammed its primary manipulation tendrils back onto the clicking device. The spawn cluster shuddered.
"Miss Knid?"
Flib whispered, her vibration almost too low to detect.
"It's one of them. From the map. How do we even capture it?"
Miss Knid slowly shunted her mass back from the mirror, gathering the children near the exit. Her voice was a strained, private vibration.
"We did not capture it, Flib."
"But it's the abomination,"
Zorp buzzed, his own voice trembling.
"It's a human."
"Yes,"
Mrs. Knid said, urging them toward the door.
"We didn't capture it. It came to us. It just appeared inside the quarantine perimeter 3 cycles ago in a tiny, unarmed ship. The ship disintegrated before the analysis drones could even scan it."
"Why?"
Gleep asked, his purple dusted stalks drooping.
"Was it an invasion?"
"No,"
Mrs. Knid sighed, her gaze drifting back to the click-click-clicking.
"It came out of the ship vibrating pure nonsense. We barely translated it. It kept sputtering about not being able to find a single real quiet place in the galaxy."
She paused, as if not believing the translation herself.
"And then it added some rather nasty comments about useless editors and A prize committee that wouldn't recognize true genius if it vaporized their entire quadrant. Ms. Kinnear let out a long, weary vibration, her own cranial sac aching in sudden, unexpected empathy with the clicking creature. It demanded sanctuary and a guaranteed work cycle without interruption. The High Command found it easier to just give it this containment cell. The creature inside suddenly stopped its high-frequency clicking, made a harsh sound from its respiration port, a snort, and began rapidly deleting its own work with a flurry of clack, clack, clack.
It's unhinged,
Blorb whispered, thoroughly terrified. It is unique, Ms. Kinnick corrected, urging the last of the spawn cluster away from the mirror. She tapped one of her upper tentacles on the large, glowing information plaque mounted on the dark alloy wall. You will not retain this data for your query slates, she ordered, but this is the official ZeZoo analysis. The class turned their sensory organs to the glowing sign. Species, human. Subspecies, writer. Variant, Artisticus neuroticus. Habitat, can live in isolation for long periods of time. Prefers dim, artificially lit enclosures. Temperament, extremely agitated. Prone to clinical bursts of high-frequency activity, clicking, followed by periods of profound lethargy and self-recrimination. Warning, critical handling protocols. Ego must be fed constantly. Specimen requires a steady diet of positive comments and routine acknowledgement of its genius. Failure to provide this sustenance may result in total system collapse or, in rare cases, spontaneous generation of bad poetry. Primary sustenance, literary prizes. Observe feeding schedule. Do not interrupt. A flow state. Food, biological, must be provided by clicking the link below.